Hey everyone, today we're going to be ranking every killer least to most loyal to the entity. This one is quite subjective, so be sure to let me know your thoughts too, down below. We have 5 tiers, let's get started. Incredibly disloyal. Trapper is a character with potentially the most humanity left of these characters. He's a character we know fought back against the entity despite however hopeless this is. The metal through his body is very likely from his defiance against the entity. He may be the original killer, but there is no sign to show us he is loyal. Quite disloyal. Wraith is an interesting case because it's unclear if he's aware that the entity is the one to have manipulated him. I think in some ways he must know. In the realm he very much seems absent of his humanity, with his far-off stare and his trauma from all he experienced. I do think comparable to other characters though, humanity is still there, and for that reason I think he simply can't be loyal to the entity. I feel like due to his years of the entity haunting his life, he's somewhat learned to stop trying to run and fight back and has accepted his fate, but I don't think he's happy about it. His ringing of the bell as a warning to survivors is some evidence of him not being entirely gone. Artist is quite dependent on whether she is aware of the entity's influence and involvement in her life and downfall. I would lean toward no, but for the sake of being interesting, I'll say she may be aware of its influence, as she notices the crows in the trials and stuff like that. With this revelation, I very much think she would be disloyal. I think her lack of fighting back likely comes down to how hopeless she feels after her life was controlled, and she had to witness so much tragedy happen to her family, friends, and herself. It's a case similar to Wraith, I think, of not liking where she is or what controls her, but ultimately having no cause to actually do anything really. Oni, I think, is actually quite disloyal. Oni is really angry, and I do think it's largely because of him now being in the realm. He died with the sight that he had destroyed his family line, and ultimately failed. He hated the name Oni Yamaoka, and in the realm, he is turned into an Oni by the entity for eternity, essentially. I think he's probably quite disloyal to the entity, despite his violent tendencies. The entity is constantly mocking him, likely to get the most emotion possible out of him. Wesker, I think, will maybe be initially happy in the realm, with him able to punish people he views as lesser than him, but eventually he's gonna get bored. Plus his whole world domination plan was kind of ruined by being taken, so I think he ends up being quite disloyal. Indifferent or neutral, Demogorgon and Hag I want to group together as two characters who are fairly animalistic and don't seem to be overly aware of their current situation or too bothered by it. Demo is just doing demo things regardless of the location, and Hag made a deal with the entity and has since lost almost all trace of her humanity, leaving her as an empty shell. I don't think there's distinct loyalty or disloyalty for either of them. Sure, the entity saved Hag, but in her current state, I'm not sure she's even aware of that anymore. Regardless, I don't think it makes her consciously loyal to the entity, but I don't think it makes her actively disloyal either. Dredge is a really tough read, seeing as it has no face or discernible personality to get any kind of read on. I would say it's indifferent for this case. It's a being of evil, and so doing what it does in the realm makes a lot of sense for it, but this doesn't necessarily mean it has loyalty toward the entity, nor does it mean it is actively disloyal either though. Myers being an embodiment of evil I think is also in the camp of not caring or having an opinion. He just wants to go around and do his thing. He isn't concerned for the location or means, he's just driven to do what he does. Potentially there is some conflict though, with Myers being able to alter the trials at will with his Moris, and how he initially got into the realm by just strolling in. Whilst these are potentially defiant actions, it doesn't seem like the entity minds much, or if it does, it can't really do anything about it. I don't think Myers does it out of trying to be disloyal, he just does it because he's just doing his own thing. Nurse, I think, is too far gone. She has some humanity remaining from her former life, seen in her Mori and stuff like that, but ultimately I think her years of her health being whittled away at Crotus Pren and her final snap is a moment she can hardly come back from. Pair this with the possibility that the entity is altering her vision to see people she hates, she's probably not disloyal, but I wouldn't say loyal either. It really depends on how much weight you put into different parts of her lore. I think she could be be debated loyal, I also think she could be debated disloyal. Executioner is a tough one to pin because it's not overly clear why he's even here. Whether he's there to punish the survivors, which doesn't make much sense, as many are not guilty of anything really, or if he's there for the entity. He was invited to the realm by the entity, and an agreement was made too, which makes it all the less clear. He does things that defy the entity's trials, like breaking the trial grounds and moriing survivors instead of hooking, but it equally seems the entity has no ability to stop him either, or maybe doesn't mind. He's a mystery. Ultimately though, I don't think he's doing it out of any sense of loyalty or disloyalty though. Blight is very debatable, I think, with Talbot having a rough time since entering the realm, from having to escape the void and stuff like that. He is likely pretty happy to be in the realm though. It was his life's goal to find it after all. With that said, I think seeing what the realm is though, and if he has humanity remaining from his past life, he likely is not that big a fan of the trials. Despite it being the place he wanted to find, I don't necessarily think it makes him loyal to the entity, but rather tolerate it, I guess. Partly because it provides him with the means to get more Blight Serum, which is ultimately his true goal these days. Cenobite, I think it's unclear what he even wants really. He came to the realm after being summoned by Dwight, and since just kinda stayed. He has no distinct loyalty to the entity, and if anything is exploiting what the entity has created for his own means. There's not necessarily a conscious choice to disobey it either though, I don't think. For these characters that the entity struggles to control, I think a lot of them aren't doing it out of any sense of loyalty or disloyalty, they're just kind of coming in and doing their own thing. They're not too concerned about anything. Quite loyal. Nemesis, I think, is quite loyal. He gets to eternally hunt down STARS members and fulfill his coded missions. Not much changes for him under the entity. Spirit is a tough one, but I do tend to think she is loyal. She may be getting manipulated, but in her rage and her current ghostly state, it's unlikely she's that aware. She was promised revenge on her father, and now serves the entity. I think for that she is loyal, but would not be had some of her humanity still remained. I think her anger has very much consumed her, and there's only brief moments of her remembering her humanity. I think on the whole though, she will be loyal, with maybe some times where she remembers and becomes disloyal. Freddy, I think, is likely a bit disloyal, but mostly loyal. In the realm he has been quite substantially nerfed, with the law stating that the entity literally just altered Freddy's powers, which I doubt he is happy about. Freddy is twisted and sadistic ultimately though, and he still seems happy at the end of his lore to be in the realm. He does still get to do what he appears to enjoy now, basically forever. It depends on how you see it, I guess, but I personally think he's here, but isn't higher because of his nerfed powers. Deathslinger, I believe, is quite loyal. At the end of his lore, he embraces his darker side, with an insight into how the entity has manipulated him, by showing the survivors to be people throughout his life who did him wrong. This manipulation is going to make him quite loyal, I think, as from his perspective, he is repeatedly getting revenge, and ultimately it appears Caleb quite easily gives into his anger, and so I think he will remain loyal. Legion are in way over their heads, and are probably completely terrified beneath the masks. I think they absolutely got more than what they bargained for, and I think they're probably terrified of the spider god that rules over them. It tries to bond with them by laying down some sick beats on their mixtapes, but I think they are mainly loyal to it because they're scared and really have no power. They're loyal to each other before anything, with that said. Bubba is similar to Legion, in that he seems to fear the entity greatly. The motivation to hurt people to begin with was his family, and so this is just amped up in the realm with the entity watching over him, ultimately making him quite loyal, I think. Not incredibly, as it's out of fear. The end of his lore outlines that he feels the need to not fail the entity, as he feels he failed his family. Incredibly loyal. Singularity is interesting, but ultimately I think it would be incredibly loyal. Hux's whole goal is creating the perfect body, and in the realm, it has access to a bunch of different survivors, more than it would have had on Dvarka, where it had already wiped out the whole of Gabriel's team. Hux views humans as disgusting, and the end of his lore states that he wants to erase them all from existence. The entity provides him with the means to do this, so I'm going incredibly loyal. Huntress and Billy I want to group together as two characters who are pretty content just being in their homeland and protecting it, as each both have a sadistic edge. In the realm they both get to do this, having their own realms of Coldwind and Red Forest, and the Eternal Trials. Maybe the only thing they don't get is freedom, but I think on the whole they are incredibly loyal to the entity. Clown, Trickster, and Doctor I want to group together too. All of these guys are horrible and completely evil, and they are going to be entirely loyal to the entity, I think, who provides them endless victims for them to do whatever they like with. Sadistic and horrible, but yeah, I think incredibly loyal. Skull Merchant's lore seems to almost pose that she believes she is in a fantasy world, comparing the realm to something like Sonjadores Sombrios, which is where the Skull Merchant character comes from, and is her father's dark manga work. She grins and seems eager to enter this new realm. She basically gets to be the character her father created for real in the realm, and much like some others, she is going to be loyal because the entity provides her what she desires. Sadako is another character I think is incredibly loyal. Sadako was trapped down her well until the entity came and saved her from it. Not only this, but it then provided her with the ability to eternally spread her curse and let her pent-up anger out onto people. Not only that, but the entity went and got Yoichi too, Yoichi being the only survivor of Sadako's curse. Pig is likely quite loyal to the entity, viewing it as someone new to work for, and she is of the belief that this is all part of Kramer's plans or tests for her. She believes what she did was right, and now she must punish the survivors. This, I think, makes her incredibly loyal, largely through her own lack of guidance. She seeks it with the entity. Knight enters the realm and is basically in awe of the place, and even states it to be the place he was looking for his entire life, and all that matters to him. In the realm, he has freedom to do as he pleases, and he even gets to take his crew along with him. Knight is undoubtedly loyal to the entity, I think, particularly because it takes Vittorio along with him. Twins, I do believe, will be incredibly loyal to the entity, despite them being less interested in violence, and their desire to simply be free from people chasing them, and simply safety. The great deal they get with the entity is that Victor is alive again. For Charlotte, an incredibly family-oriented character, this is basically all she requires, I think, to make her endlessly loyal. The entity resurrected her brother and reunited them, and in the realm, they are no longer in danger or constantly hunted. Ghostface is without a doubt incredibly loyal to the entity. He smiles with anticipation upon entering the realm, and the entity seems to favor him back a lot too. He has his cool floaty costume courtesy of the entity, and gets free roam to do as he pleases as the Ghostface, so definitely loyal. Plague is similarly loyal to the entity, and is debatably the most loyal out of any of these characters, with her believing it to be her god, and to have saved all of her people from the deadly Babylonian plague. The entity whispered to her throughout her years, and made her believe it was real and her god. From her perspective, and through the entity's manipulation, she believes she is serving it for the greater good of her people, and so is incredibly loyal. Alright, well, that's gonna do it. I do hope you enjoyed. Drop your thoughts down below. Thanks, and goodbye.